All right, so last night, me and a buddy, we went out and killed a stack of feral pigs down here in the Caribbean, and I mean like literally a stack. So processing them, skinned them, all of that, ended up with dull knives. So it's the opportunity for me to show you guys some methodology that's gonna make it so you're no longer frustrated. I've been a guide pretty much my entire adult life, processed tons of animals, sharpened every type of hunting knife you can think of, really every type of utensil you can get sharp you can think of out in the field. And a big chunk of that time I spent frustrated, and really for the wrong reasons. The key is to simplify this shit. It's not that hard, but the problem is each layer of complexity you add to sharpening makes it exponentially harder. So I'm going to show you exactly what you need to focus on, and I guarantee in the future you're going to have the confidence to get any knife sharp, keep it sharp. So without further ado, let's dive right into it. All right, so the first thing you have got to understand is the burr on the edge of a knife. All right, it's easy for me to depict this on this little mini machete here, but on this bevel, right? So this is the cutting bevel on this machete, this right here. Okay, that's actually what's going to do the cutting. When you sharpen a knife, you are going to have to develop a burr across the entire edge of the knife. Now, you can't hypothetically know what a burr is. You can't, maybe I've felt it, maybe I've seen it. That's not it. If you're in that realm and that's you, you're like, I think I know what he's talking about. You don't know what I'm talking about. A burr is really obvious once you've developed one. And what I would suggest, because it's so hard, like I can take my knife here that I have made, or a high quality knife like this Montana Knife Company knife. I can take this knife, and if I'm new to sharpening, I'm still trying to figure out what to focus on. I can wrestle with this thing for ages, trying to create a burr, and I'm worried about destroying the knife. I'm worried about all this other stuff, and I never actually get that burr and know exactly what that burr is. So what I suggest is get one of these. These things are cheap. I think they're like $10, $15 max. You can see everything, you can handle everything because it's big, and you'll be able to crank up a burr on this really easily because it's soft metal. And then a bonus is you're not gonna fuck it up. Or if you do fuck it up, you can just buy another one for $10. I also recommend to do it on an electric sharpener. That's gonna be blasphemy to some folks, but it's going to be easier for you to see that burr, right? Because you can set it on the electric sharpener. As you change the angle, you'll actually see the burr develop in the light, and that's going to give you a visual indicator of the burr. On these other knives, as you sharpen them, you get into your hunting knives, it's going to be much harder for you to actually see the burr, particularly on really high-end steels, hard steels. You really don't get that big burr that you will on this cheap stuff. So I recommend that. Now you can do it on a set of stones or like this type of sharpening thing here. Those are cheap, and I'm going to show you on one of my good knives exactly how I do my sharpening on the latter half of this video. But I just want to pinpoint first, you have to understand what a burr is, what it feels like, what it looks like, because that's a key component of this whole thing. It's the number one thing, and I don't want you guys faking yourself into believing you know what one is when you don't. You have to figure out what that is, or everything else that I say is not going to make any sense. And the reality is, if you go out and watch other YouTube videos out there, they're going to jump into a bunch of other shit that's way down the line, this 2% minutia that hardly moves the needle, particularly for somebody who's just learning. And you, if you don't know what a burr is, are going to fall for that trap. So pound it in. Go buy one of these. Develop a burr on it, do it on electric, do it on a set of stones, whatever, it doesn't matter, but you want to be able to see it. And then on these you can also feel it better too. It'll grab your thumb, right? It'll grab your thumb as you go. It's going to look like this for a visual. Okay, see the little edge right here peeled over there? Guys, biltong, okay? I have been obsessed with this stuff for 3 or 4 years. Ever since I got on a keto, carnivore, paleo-esque type of diet, I've had a hard time finding healthy snacks. Biltong is a great option, particularly the slabs that have this fat on the side. That's where your energy is if you're a fat burner like me. Super simple ingredients in this, guys. Literally 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ingredients. Compare that to your gas station jerky, a great snack in the backcountry or just day to day. Biltong Depot is a huge supporter of my content. Go to their website, biltongdepot.com. Use my discount code CLIFFG, CLIFFG for 15% off at checkout and to support this content. Thanks, guys. All right, so first you gotta understand a little theory so I can work you into this, all right? This is what makes a knife sharp, an apex, right? The point right there. Pretty obvious, but not so obvious when you get into the weeds of it. This is what a lot of knives' edges look like. Not necessarily knives that have been dulled by use. I'm talking about knives that maybe you or maybe somebody else who doesn't have this figured out have actually attempted to sharpen. They'll have a round apex like that. And the reason that is, a lot of sharpeners are trying to focus on a bunch of different things they're told to focus on all at once, right? This is like patting your belly, rubbing your belly in circles and hopping up and down at the same times. Most people can't do it, or they can't do it without a shitload of practice. Sharpening is the same way, and what happens is, imagine this is your coarse sharpening stone, right? Or your electric sharpener, just the edge. It's not a strop, right? All right, so we are trying to keep the exact angle, right? We're trying to count the strokes as we run the bevel along there. We're trying to keep our pressure the exact same. We have all of this crap going on, and the result is that we don't do any of that. We're slightly off on the angle a little bit here and here. We've got more pressure on this side. We've got less pressure on this side. More angle this time we do it. We forget when we're counting, and we've done more strokes on that side, back and forth, because we're in this mindset of 10 strokes this side, 10 strokes that side, change the grit, and then 10 strokes this, 10 strokes this, right? So all the time, we're trying to keep everything even, and we're going all over the place, and we ended up with a rounded apex. This is the most common issue for people who are new to sharpening, is they just keep trying to repeat something that they think is a recipe, but they're not dealing with the fact that just anatomically, it's hard for us to keep all those variables aligned at one time. All right, so the next issue that you'll run into is this right here, the dull but not dull apex. And I've got to go over these two categories. I'm going to show you guys how to solve it in one fell swoop here in a second when I sharpen this knife on these stones, but it helps if you understand the theory here. So there actually is an apex on this knife, right? Comes together, but it's flat on the top, and this can be across the whole edge, right? The whole edge can be that way, or it can just be in spots along the edge. And this is what we associate with a knife that's been dulled by use, right? But a lot of times people will sharpen knives and they look like this when they're done. The reason they get away with it is if you get knives like a kitchen knife, right, or a fillet knife, and they've got really thin geometry, even if that apex is wide, through soft material, they'll cut pretty well. So any vegetables in your house, they're gonna cut pretty good typically through that, even though you don't have a good apex. Now in the hunting context, this can be a challenge, because a lot of people who sharpen that way, what they do is they start to have kind of dual experiences with the knife, right? When they're in soft tissue, even if they take the tip of their knife and they go under the hide and they're cutting from, the inside out, they're not going through the hair. Like for me, when I'm gonna take legs off an elk or something, I grab it, I cut right through the hair because I got shit to do. I'll go right through the hair, cut right at the joint and get rid of the leg. But a lot of people don't want to do that, and there's good reason for that. It'll save your knife a little bit if you go under the hide, and it won't get hair everywhere. Totally agree. It's not, there's just different in use cases. But what I'm getting at is that if you go under that, a lot of times if your knife is pointy enough, you're going straight into soft tissue, right? And you'll feel like, oh, this knife is super sharp. And then if you go from there to pulling the back straps out and you're just into meat, you're not having to cut anything hard, you're gonna think to yourself, this knife is sharp. But the minute you go into something that's hard, it could be, a sinewy chunk. It could be, going in here and trying to get into those tendons, right around all the joints at the base of the skull, that sort of thing. You're gonna notice that your knife is really dull all of a sudden. And then, if you get lazy and you go to my method of getting the last leg and going into the hide, you're like, man, my knife is so dull. And that's because that wide apex, that flat apex, is all of a sudden hitting something hard, and it stops how good your knife actually will work in both cases. So that thin geometry of the knife no longer works. Now, it's brutal if you get into like a thicker knife, right? I don't have any good ones here. My dive knife is pretty thick actually, and it comes down really quickly. So if you don't have a really good apex, a really sharp knife, you're gonna notice it when you're going through material, hard or soft. But a lot of these knives, particularly these hunting knives like Cliff's Hunter or this Black Foot from Montana Knife Company, you can see like this is a saber grind here, so it's got a pretty thick spine, but it thins down pretty darn thin to that cutting bevel. And then Josh's knife here at Montana Knife, it's actually even more so. It's got a flat grind all the way from the spine all the way down to the cutting bevel, so it thins out really tight, right? So these knives, even if you get them a little dull, or if you don't hit that apex perfectly when you're sharpening them, they're gonna work really good through soft tissue. Even if you start to dull them a little bit, you know, you start hit a few hard things when you're working on a deer or elk, you're gonna feel like you still have a pretty damn sharp knife. But we wanna start with the sharp knife. So how do we get there? Or, well, first let's assess how we got there. One, you dull them, I kinda covered that. But the other reason that you get there is you're being too hesitant about taking material off of the knife. A lot of people do this, particularly they go out and buy a $300 or $400 knife, one of mine, one of Montana Knife Company's knives, one of the, you know, an assortment of awesome knives out there that have good steel in them, and they don't want to destroy them, which is reasonable. But what that results in is they don't want to hit that apex. They don't want to take off very much material. So on a stone, they're constantly hesitant, right? They're constantly hesitant, and that spine's down a little bit too low all the time. And a lot of times if they put a marker or something on there, they're gonna see that they're just hitting where, you know, either the face of the knife right here, if you don't have I'll describe it on this, it'll be a little easier for me. Bevel here goes into the cutting bevel, right? A lot of times they're just hitting that line right there. If you look at their knives, you'll see where they've sharpened just along that. And what they end up with is they end up kind of rounding that corner, but then they end up with an apex that just doesn't quite hit. And I'll tell you, people who actually use the Sharpie trick on knives, which I think it'll get you kind of close to where I'm gonna go with this here in a second, but it's not perfect. And I'll tell you why right now. You put a Sharpie on there, and now you're hesitant, and you're not using much pressure. You're worried about this pressure on this side being the exact same as the other side, all of that, so you're just being hesitant. What happens when you do that is you end up taking material off all the way up into the very, very edge. Even if you've got that black Sharpie on there, a lot of people who use that Sharpie trick, if you look at their edges, they don't quite actually get that apex because they just take all the Sharpie off, and then they're real delicate, go to the other side of the knife, take all the Sharpie off the bevel. They're like, I gotta be sharpening it. And then they get the knife kind of sharp, right? Because it's got that flat top, like I said, goes through soft material just fine, but it's not sharp at all, honestly. You're not accomplishing the right thing. Cliff's Hunter, I created this knife from iteration in the field. It has been modified and perfected for the backcountry use case. It is my belief that in terms of all-around knives, this is the last knife that an elk hunter, mule deer hunter, sheep hunter, goat hunter will need to buy. Go check it out on my website, pursuitwithcliff.com. In the top right, click shop, then Cliff's Hunter. All the details are there. So, what's the actual solution? I'll show you right now how I do it on this cheap sharpener right here. You can do it on a set of stones. I've got a whole long video, I think it's called the last sharpening video you'll ever watch, that goes through this in detail on whetstones. You can go watch that. I'll stick it up right here. Maybe it's up here. I always get that screwed up. But one of those spots, I'll put that there. You can check it out. But in this case, I'll just show you on this tri-stone. You can get these a lot of places. I think I bought this at like Walmart here down in the Caribbean. So pretty readily available everywhere, right? But you've got a coarse stone, mid stone, and then basically a fine ceramic stone. All right, so in the close-up, you're gonna see me sharpening this knife. This knife is now sharp, so I'm not gonna use it right now as I demonstrate this from a distance. I'll use the Black Foot, right? Very similar knives in terms of shape, and even the edge geometry is pretty similar. But first thing I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna put a little mineral oil on here. Helps me out, and then down here we get a lot of humidity, so it's kind of nice to have a bunch of oil on your knife before you store it anyway. So what I'm gonna do on the coarse side here is I'm just gonna put my knife down pretty much on the side that I feel more comfortable on. I'm using quite a bit of pressure. And then I'm gonna feel for that burr. Don't have it yet. Notice I'm not changing sides or anything like that, because I'm gonna use the burr as my indicator. You're gonna notice that part of the edge for sure gets a burr first. And this is why if you're not sharpening this way, a lot of people who freehand sharpen, they think they know what they're doing, but they don't know what they're doing. They get what I call an S burr. And that's that they have on their finished knife, what they think is a sharp knife. One part of the knife, like up here at the tip, will have a burr on this side, and then down here it'll have a burr on this side, but they've slowly gone down grit with that there, and so they end up with a decently sharp knife, but it still has a burr that S's along the edge. That's a problem. You're never going to get your knife actually sharp if you do that. So you've got to get a burr from the tip to the heel of the knife before you do anything else, before you flip the knife over. I know some of you are going to jump up and scream and be like, yeah, well, you can do a super steep angle and crank up a burr. Yeah, that's obvious. You don't want to do that. You want to somewhat match the bevel, but the whole play is not to get obsessed with a million variables at once. Just focus on that burr. Sure, way in the back of your mind, say, hey, I should match this bevel. It should be somewhat flat against the stone, but don't worry about it. I'm telling you, if you don't worry about it, the chances of you getting way too steep are actually pretty damn rare. You're way more likely to do what I said before and be a weenie about it and not get enough angle and not get enough pressure than you are to do the opposite. So in this case, I've got burr on the base of the edge right here. So down at the heel of the knife, use the proper term. I can feel that burr. Then up here, near the tip, I can't feel it, and this is really common. You're never gonna hit it right the first time. As you do it more, you'll get better at it, but you can work just that part of the knife. Okay. All right, so now I feel with my thumb right here, and I can feel that burr on this side, the opposite side that was against the stone. I can feel that burr the entire way. So what that looks like, it's gonna look like this for a visual, okay? See the little edge right here, peeled over there? Don't do anything else. No other swipes, don't change the stone, don't do anything until you have a burr on there. The only thing you might do is you might go to a coarser stone if you're just not getting any progress, you're not taking enough material off, you might go to a coarser stone. But you have to have the burr along that whole edge, okay? Now something I'll do if I've been jumping around a whole lot, like the heel had no burr, the tip did, now I did the heel a bunch, so now it's probably uneven. I will do some, continuous swipes just to clean up, smooth out, any inconsistency I made. Okay, now I'm gonna flip my knife over and I'm gonna do the exact same thing on the other side. So I'm not gonna worry about just peeling the burr off or anything at this point. I'm just gonna bring the burr up on the other side. This is a much easier side for me to do it on, just the way my hands are. It might be a little harder for you to see, but I'm gonna do here. And with such a short knife, I think I can just do it with one hand. And I can already feel the burr on the top 2/3 of the knife. And you're gonna realize that one side it's gonna be a lot easier for you to pull up a burr. Part of that is that you've already kind of figured out the angle from doing the first side. And then I'll just kind of blend those in. Okay. Okay, burr through the whole side there. So the one thing I want to show you is I've just focused on the burr. So one of the results of that is, look at the bevel on that. You can tell on this knife because it's Cerakoted, you can see that bevel probably. The bevel on this side is slightly wider than it is on this side. And that is a result of not having a perfect apex. But a perfect apex doesn't really matter that much. If you look at a sushi knife or something like that, it's literally a lopsided apex. It's like this, right? It'll still cut. For the hunting use case, it doesn't matter if your apex is off a little bit like this, you can still get it really sharp and have a super usable knife. That's where people get obsessed, right? They want this perfect, same bevels, the same size on both sides. And what happens is they get back into the world of, in order to do that, you have to have the exact same pressure, the exact number of strokes, the exact angle. And most people can't do that, and that's why they go down in this hole of frustration, right? So you're gonna end up, I'm just telling you, you're gonna end up with bevels slightly different size. Don't sweat it. If you sharpen your knife for years like that, you're gonna eventually have way too big a difference, and you need to go straighten it out on, you know, some sort of tool that holds the exact angle for you. There's a bunch of them out there. Edge Pro makes one, Worksharp makes one. They work great, but you gotta set them up, and they're kind of a pain on that front, right? I can do this right here when I'm showing you, when I'm not videoing, I can do it in less than a minute, right? I can just crank up a burr on one side, crank up the burr on the other side, and now I know I have an apex, right? I don't have to worry about all those other variables, and I can get the knife sharp. If you focus just on this, I guarantee, if you've been frustrated in the past, you're gonna solve this, right? So all we gotta do now, because I've got that burr on the other side now, across the whole knife, all I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna go to my medium stone. At this point, I'm not worrying about the burr anymore because I know I have the apex. Now, I gotta get that burr off of there. And one of the ways that you're gonna do that is to thin it out. If you just went and tried to strip this off on a strop right here, one, you may not ever get it because it just could be too strong of a burr, or you might just set it up straight where you think your knife's sharp, but you've got a real thin piece of burr there, and that gets torn off eventually. You know, so you can't really go straight from coarse to that, to just stripping the burr off. You can get into some nuances here. I've had a discussion with Josh Smith about this because he has some, you know, really cool insight into the exact grit progression he uses, because he likes to have, once the burr is removed, he likes to have basically just micro serrations on the sharpened edge, because he feels it's more toothy and it has a little more utility as a hunting knife. And then kind of, just because serrations do this, it kind of gives a little more longevity to the knife, particularly in the hunting application, because all that hard stuff that you hit off right off the bat, like hair or that sort of thing, it's protecting that real cutting edge by having little micro serrations that are basically a remnant of the burr there to protect that edge. For me, I don't worry about that too much. I just keep it simple, right? I don't progress through millions of different grits. I'm just gonna go literally to this one and the ceramic a couple times, and I just go a few times. I'm just trying to weaken that burr, you know, left to right, left to right. I'll move to the ceramic, it'll end up vanishing, and then I'll strop it. So here, I'm no longer being crazy about it. Pretty light strokes. Reaching down just to feel if I can feel that burr on either side now. I really don't. It's pretty much gone. It's a little bit on this side. Okay. So here I'll move to the fine, do the same thing. Feel for that burr, if there's any remnants of it. Pretty darn sharp. So at this point, I don't get too crazy and go down a bunch more grits or anything else. I'm just gonna strop the knife. I like to go tip back, and I'll tell you why in a second. So The reason I do that, tip to heel when I'm stropping, is I actually find that I'm much less likely to put too much pressure on the strop. A lot of people will put a lot of pressure on the strop because it gives, and what happens is that leather material, it wraps around that edge, and then right there at the end, you're basically dulling the edge. You're basically rounding the edge right there. So some people will do that, and I actually have a tendency to do that if I don't go tip to heel. All right. I'm assuming this thing's pretty sharp. We'll see here. Cutting hair. Pretty darn good. Getting all over my Garmin. So, smoking sharp. Ooh. And just so you guys can see, that is with for sure a lopsided bevel. See the bevel there? Relative to the bevel there, this side is a bit smaller than that side. And that is because I just focused on getting that apex with the burr. If you just focus on this type of sharpening, you're never gonna have to worry about it again. And if you wanna extend your sharpening into all the minutia, you can do that, because now you at least understand the dynamic of getting this thing super sharp from the get-go, what's actually important, and then you can move on. If you enjoyed this video, you're gonna love this one, how to get a deer. I go through the whole thing with a GoPro camera on, all the details. I actually think I use one of these knives so you can see exactly how a sharpened knife performs in the field, and I actually sharpen that knife in the field while I'm gutting that deer and getting it ready to throw in the back of my truck too. So all of it's there. I think you'll enjoy it. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you later.